All right, so welcome to the Rebuild Procurement podcast, where we talk about lots of things procurement. Today, we'll go into AI and robots. Also, we'll touch on Kearney and McKinsey on the back end, talk a little bit about interest rates, and we will do a supplier deep dive on the back end.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
So I'm Tom Finn. I have 15 years client-side finance, procurement, strat sourcing experience.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of our business. And I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a company we call Summit.
All right. First off, how you doing? Doing good?
Yeah, doing well. And I see a different backdrop for you.
Yeah.
You're in a strange and different city.
Yes. Yeah. Every city could be different and strange. I'm in LA today. So it's a little early for me. So I am underslept and overcaffeinated. So that might come through. But we'll see. So. Let's not hope so. But I think the first thing we got on the docket here is the rise of the robots.
Rise of the robots. I like that. It sounds ominous. It seems like there needs to be
kind of like my lighting
Halloween
today
coming up.
It's like my lighting.
My titles. Yeah, I was in the last week as I was trolling around different websites and getting different news sources. Three different robotics stories kind of came all in the same day, and that kind of made me think, hey, it's probably worth talking a little bit about robotics. We talk about AI, we talk about software bots basically, but we don't necessarily talk a lot about the physical robots. Although I guess last week we kind of did when we were pointing at Tesla and the announcement about the bus and the robotaxi. But there were three interesting stories, and the way I come at this is we do some work inside Summit with robotics companies. We've worked with one company very closely that actually we lovingly refer to as the chicken robots. They're these garbage can sized robots that roll around chicken barns. And if nobody's seen a chicken barn or haven't recognized the chicken barns that you've seen on the side of the interstate, they are basically 3 football fields long and 60 feet wide, and they contain 50,000 chicks that take about 30 days, 35 days to gestate into the dinner that you'll soon see in front of you from Buffalo Wild Wings. And so those
don't sound like the free range chicken that now I purchase my wife via my wife.
Technically,
pasture raised, I think, is where we're really.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Portlandia episode, Meet Your Chicken, Colin. But yeah, no, these aren't exactly the same, but they are the bulk of the main protein source. Chickens are like the number one protein source in the world. And this is how we grow them. And the reason why I bring this company up, I've been up close and personal with this business. We've actually driven those chicken robots. They're eventually going to be autonomous, but we have a team of people that help drive those chicken robots. We perform the labor of being the human in the loop. So you've got robots that can do robotic things, but there's always the human that has to kind of go the last mile, do the last bit of work that we're more suited to do that the robots aren't so suited to do. But the reason why I bring this up is because we've run across a lot of robotics companies, and I think one of the things to pay attention to in the robot world is this task that I'm asking a robot to do, is it something that a robot is imminently suited to do, comfortably suited to do versus what a human does? So for instance, we talked to one robotics company about providing human in the loop services, and they were building robots that would clean hotel bathrooms. And as we watched it, as we saw it, we kind of thought, interesting job. Yeah, probably one of the nastier, dirtier jobs, like Micro would talk about, that humans might not want to do. But cleaning a bathroom is actually a really tough thing to do. Humans are more suited to doing that than a robot is. So I don't think that company ever went on to great things. We did work with this company, the chicken robot company. And interestingly, driving around a chicken barn is a pretty good robotic function. It's pretty easy to do, not too difficult. And there are several jobs inside the chicken barn that a robot can do. It's kind of a messy environment, again, dirty work, so maybe better suited for a robot than for a human. The three that I'm going to highlight today, there's one that is very interesting, caught my eye. It's actually being implemented right now. It's called Escape, like a little play on the word escape. Escape, which is a fully automated massage robot, which I thought was fascinating. So you can see the video here that Brandon brought up. Thanks for bringing that up, BLT. And it looks a little frightening. Maybe it's Tom, maybe it's continuing our Halloween theme. But in essence, it uses lasers to make a 3D image of your body, and then uses this kind of soft padded robot to give you a massage all over your body, which is quite fascinating. But I guess one of the things I wanted to point out is this, you can go get this today in, I think it's New York City is the pilot city. They've got a couple of spas that have these robots. And when you see the video of it actually doing its thing, I don't know, it looks plausible to me. It looks like it could be a way to basically get your massage down to a cost where you could do it just about daily, which would be kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, and it could also, it's one of those things, I mean, they're kind of a robot's been doing massage for a while. People love those chairs. Even when you go through an airport, they have the chairs that people pay through, like whatever, Minute whatever, Express Spa, things of that nature. It's also maybe the reverse, Alan, to think of what robots would be good at, maybe in current state, is what aren't humans good at. So there was this other, I didn't put it in the notes, but I've been following them a bit. Gecko Robotics. They have
right
ones
here in
that.
Pittsburgh.
Oh, are they? Okay, yeah. So they're
out of CMU.
Yeah, Pittsburgh's quite well known for being forward looking. It's kind of like the Austin of Pennsylvania. But
when it comes to robotics, for sure.
Yeah, robotics, but also I think AI is decently known for. But the interesting thing about the one when I was just clicking through their website before, like their robots that can kind of like hug onto the side of like a ship, right, and then go like clean the side of a ship. That's not really like from an ergonomic standpoint. That's not great for a human to do. It kind of makes more sense to have that automated, where to the point of or the example of have like the 3D image. If you have a ship and it knows where all the windows are and whatever, even like a cruise line, it could probably go up and down and wash it off quite good.
Well, you're a good straight man. That's a good intro into the next robot, which is Osmo. It's a window washing robot, and the big push on this robot is kind of what you just hinted at, which is safety. So, Brandon, if you could bring up that video, anytime you have people hovering several stories above the ground, you got safety as an issue. And this is a robotics company that basically makes a robot that not only can do that more safely, but can do it more quickly. Pretty cool to think about.
That one is cool.
Yeah.
Which basically just to play by play this is basically you still have the kind of that little cart that like this. I've been in high rise towers a decent amount of my career, and you see those guys floating down the side of the building with their little cart, just doing essentially what you would do with your windshield. Obviously, much better, much more experienced, much more professionally. And this is a robot. Essentially, there's two of the robots sitting in the middle, or sitting towards the middle of that cart, and they essentially just do that motion over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one's pretty cool.
Yeah. Again, you think about the application. This is one that's perfectly suited for the robot versus the human, and so I think that we're still stuck a little bit in the land where we're saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I could make a robot to do X? And sometimes X isn't well suited for a robot versus a human. So we're seeing a lot of what I think are goofy applications of robotics as opposed to applied applications. And this, the couple that I'm showing here feel like ones that are well suited to what a robot is good at doing. So I thought those were interesting, and I hope that those who are in the innovative startup world, who are thinking about the next generation robotics companies are really thinking about what is applied, what is perfectly suited to a robot that that might not be so suited to a human.
Yeah, and tough thing with these Gen 1, just to use I know nothing about the window washing one, but what comes into play a lot with, call it like any type of like machine, is whether it breaks down, has to stay up and running. What's the maintenance cost on these things?
Yep.
They come into play when you do a comparison versus like physical labor, like people labor, um, as well. So it's just something that will be part of that equation when folks are considering these types of just machines or robots, whatever you want to call them.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. The last example I wanted to dig into is a story I read about Amazon, and one of the areas that I've been fascinated in for about 20 years is kind of logistics, supply chain robotics, and supply chain startups. So when I was in my venture capital days in the early 2000s, we made a couple of investments in this space, one of which was in a company called Kiva Robotics, Kiva Robotics, out of Boston. And Amazon actually was our first exit. Amazon bought Kiva for $750 million. And it's interesting to see the evolution of how they took that innovative robotic technology, a warehouse technology, and put it into their various warehouses. This is the latest instance where I've seen it. So Amazon just opened up a huge.
Before you say what it does, it just looks like a Roomba that is 3 times the size with a nice color green surrounding it.
I love the play-by-play. Yeah, so it basically is it basically drives around an empty warehouse for the most part and picks up bins and takes them to users on the outside of the warehouse who pick and pack our packages and put them on trucks to go out to us. This is just one of 8 different robotic systems that is in this new Amazon facility. So it's quite fascinating. This Amazon facility, 3 million square feet. That's the equivalent of 55 football fields put together. So just think about the scope of this thing. It's a 5-story warehouse distribution facility that Amazon just built down in Shreveport, and the upshot is 8 different systems or models of robotics are living side by side in this place. So the one you saw in that picture is just one of them, but they've got basically a main controlling warehouse management unit they call Sequoia that across all floors kind of controls all the robots to work together. Then they've got a series of robots that do picking operations. So that is, go and find the item that I just ordered, put it in a bin so that it eventually finds its way to me. That's picking of items. And then they've got packaging robots. And then they've got a robot like the one that we saw in that picture that is the movement robot that'll move it around the warehouse itself. And then they've got different packing robots that'll actually pack the box and put it on the truck to come out to us. So I thought it was quite interesting. And you think about the article mentioned that this particular warehouse has 10 times the robotics in it than a traditional Amazon warehouse. You think about how this is really driving your ability to get your packages quickly, get your packages at a low cost. It's quite an amazing evolution of use of robotics in the way that we live our lives. And I think I wanted to just highlight that because that's what goes on behind the scenes when you click a button to order anything from Amazon.
Yeah, and I think with them building the new warehouses, so we have these, the idea of these humanoid robots, the ones that look like humans, to kind of live in the human world. Like your kitchen's a certain height, your desk is a certain height, things of that nature. Got to move around it. When the warehouses end up being purpose built for these kind of Roombas to zoom around and pick stuff up, then you don't need that type of humanoid robot, right? So as new builds happen and some of this technology is proven out, that's when you'll see more of. I would expect to see even more of this, and probably an uptick in robotics as that capex gets invested.
Yeah, I think it's quite a fascinating and fun world. So just wanted to kind of do a little spot here on the rise of the robots. Hopefully, we see more of them. Hopefully, they become more and more a part of our everyday life.
Yeah, and I think
right.
just one more comment, Alan, just on the idea of robots becoming more and more part of everyday life. It's also like as companies that everyone works for or works with. I mean, there's also going to be these changes, kind of like the automotive industry saw, because they were building big things that were real expensive, and then they have those giant arms that are putting on windshields and things like that. I think the idea of where robots are going now is kind of just more purpose built for smaller types of tasks. So they came from, again, like whatever, $20,000, $30,000, $100,000 cars, whatever they're being built with the robots, now to be more, lower dollar things that they'll be supporting. So just have to kind of think where, especially with folks that are listening to this, being a part of that process of maybe finding the next supplier or doing some due diligence, that's kind of where companies are going to go. So it's good to be ahead of those things.
Yeah, maybe there one day, to tie this into procurement, maybe one day there'll be category managers who specialize in robots and robotics.
Smoking a cigar, maybe they'll be negotiating, smoking a cigar on the other side of the table or something. Bring it back to the 70s.
I love it. That's good. It's a good image.
I know. Yeah, feels like that's one that ChatGPT could help us out with there. Cigar smoking robot.
Good.
Cool. All right. The next one we had on the docket here, and I was dying, Alan, to overlay this. Speaking of AI failing me, I asked ChatGPT to do it, and and what I asked it was, I said, can you overlay inflation or CPI numbers with interest rates, just to kind of see where the reaction happened? And I was like, oh, that could be interesting because it can graph now. So I do it, and I was like, oh my gosh, like look at that. It was like right after inflation goes up, they were dropping interest rates. Wow, I was like, bring it back a quarter. It was unbelievable. And then I was like, wait a sec. Interest rates weren't 1% in 2023. I was like, what's going on with Q3, whatever, 2023? It's like, I didn't have the data, so I made it up. I was like, you can go to whatever the government websites was. I was like, oh my gosh. So I was elated, and then I was disappointed. But I had on here.
Did ChatGPT give you a little LOL, like ha ha ha?
Should have, yeah. Tricked you.
In your prompts, you have to say, "Don't lie."
Yeah, no
don't
lying.
Make up data, please tell me. Yeah,
that's what it was. It was like, oh, I got that wrong. I was like, well, just go back. Like, can you fix it? It's like, no, I just made it all up. I was like, oh my gosh. So, but that is a thing with these tools. So the government, they have certain access restrictions, right? That they can read. There was a Wall Street Journal article about Perplexity, which is a ChatGPT competitor. Wall Street Journal, or the parent company, is going after Perplexity for reading, essentially reading their website and using their data. Because everything that a Wall Street Journal author writes is the Wall Street Journal's. You can read it, but there's a whole reproduction thing.
Copyrighted. Yep.
Yeah, copyright, which is an important part of the U.S. economy. So that's generally quite well protected. But now that's kind of going to be shown through this AI. But the soft landing is where I was trying to get to. So J.P. Morgan called a soft landing. Essentially, this has been talked about for a while. When inflation goes up, so when stuff starts getting more expensive, what the Federal Reserve does is they raise interest rates to try and balance it out. So that's when we saw the interest rates spike. If you were trying to buy a home, buy a car, that got pretty darn expensive. Went from like 2.75, maybe 3% on a mortgage to, I think folks are paying like 8-9% on a mortgage with good credit. So now where it's at is interest rates are starting to come down because inflation is supposedly coming down on a year-over-year basis. So that's called what is termed a soft landing. So I feel like you have some comments here, Alan, and I'm interested to hear. Yeah. I see your face. If folks that aren't watching should watch, because you can see Alan ready to, like, chomping at the bit to say something about this.
No, I'm going to be a good boy, and I'm going to bite my tongue. And, But this famous measure CPI that isn't a static measure that's changed over the course of time. There's a lot of controversy around what gets tossed into the CPI and what gets excluded.
I'll tell you what, going through the government website, it is tough to even they're like, look at all this interactive stuff. You can see bananas. What is the CPI on bananas? And I'm like, no, I kind of just want to see like the basket. Because there's this basket of goods. The idea of you buy this, this shopping cart of stuff. So you got your bread, you got this, you got that.
Yeah.
So you can't. It has with oil, like with gasoline in your car, without gasoline in your car, housing, things of that nature. So it is tough to see what it is.
Yeah, it does feel like, given where we are with AI and with compute power, we could come up with like top 100 personas in the U.S. Different socioeconomic categories, and say, here's what inflation is doing to each one of these personas, each one of these demographics, and you could get a sense for how adversely different people are affected. But I think the way that we're doing it today, we're kind of smearing peanut butter, and we're not even doing a good job. It's not even peanut butter. It's some just like gelatinous oil, where we're not measuring where inflation is really popping up, like college tuition, healthcare, home prices, rent. That stuff is largely excluded from a lot of the measures of inflation.
And it should be so clear.
It drives me nuts.
It's so easily measurable.
Yeah.
Like all the data's there. The government could just say, hey, guys, we need that, and we don't care. You're going to give it to us.
Yeah. And since the feds have their hands on the dial of, hey, we want to turn the economy up or turn it down, you would want them to have as clean a windshield as possible to be able to see which direction they're going. It's just kind of it's a
Well, financial markets don't mind opaqueness either, because that's where with opaqueness you can make money. Just generally, that's kind of, it's just like a well-known thought, right? If it's a little obscure, if you have like a moat around you, if you know, or at least have a really good feeling because even you worked in an industry forever and you kind of just know the ins and outs of the industry, you could probably start a company in there better than a new kid off the block. So that's opaque to the new kid and clear to you. That's where you can kind of succeed where others can't. So in many cases, folks they say they want clarity, but only if it supports them.
Yep, that's right.
I know.
Okay,
I'm being a little
upshot soft landing is what are you, Tom, are you calling a soft landing?
You heard it here. No, I can't. I'm trying to get the data still. I want to see if it looks right. The financial industries are also like, you have to always look at who's giving you information, and JP Morgan's quite reputable. And they have, the research department is separate from, the investments, all that kind of stuff, as they say. But it's always good to, if you can get access to data and you're interested in it, go check it out for yourself. Because the government is, while we complain, I'm just saying we're complaining about CPI and things changing, they're quite transparent. You just gotta have to know where the data's at, but it's usually on their website. So I want to check that.
Yeah.
We'll call a soft landing next week, Alan. Or soft or hard.
We'll tease everyone. We're gonna call it next week. And to your point about
whatever, we could just call it. Tom says soft landing, but I don't know if it's true or not, just based on JP Morgan's analysis.
We'll bear it on the back page of the business section later if we need to.
Exactly, when we start our newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. But the just under the point of kind of the digs that I put at the CPI number. Yeah, you are right. There is a lot more transparency in our system of government than there are in a lot of others. I know that one of the particular problems with China right now is they are not only internally open but externally open with their data, and there's huge fear that we are looking at an imminent collapse of the Chinese economy, which has been in one of the more interesting things that I read said, hey, that should not just scare you from a global economy standpoint, but it should scare you from a war standpoint of conflict, because typically when a government has their economic back up against the wall, they look for other ways to entertain their populace, and that oftentimes leads to conflict. So Taiwan, in a foreshadowing of what you're going to be talking about coming up in your in your business segment, in the next segment.
Supplier corner, whatever we'll call it. Yeah.
Supplier. Yeah. The supplier corner. Taiwan might want to be careful if China has some bad economic news.
Yeah. Yeah. It wouldn't be the first time a company, even company, but governments, they don't mind shifting focus away from internal problems. And,
Yep.
having a bad guy always is always helpful in that storyline. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that's not the case, but there's quite a powerful nation for sure.
Yeah, a lot of things to watch there. All right,
for sure.
Should I shift over? Last week we did a little bit of a tease. We talked a little bit about the inventors of the first 7-step strategic sourcing process, Kearney. And I said, hey, maybe next week I'll do a little history of consulting, management consulting, and specifically procurement consulting in the U.S.
Let's do it.
So it's interesting because we actually are on the precipice of the 100-year anniversary of the management consulting profession. McKinsey got its start in 1926. So in 2026, we'll celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the industry. And interestingly, James McKinsey, he was known as Mac. James McKinsey was a University of Chicago accounting professor, and he wanted to apply the principles of mathematical accounting into the management profession. So he started doing some consulting first with the Army. This was before he kind of left University of Chicago. He did some work with the Army, and then when he left and started his firm, McKinsey and Company, that was in 1926. He went and did his very first client was Armour, a meat packer, Armour Company. So he was based in Chicago, and one of the first partners that he hired was Andrew Thomas Kearney, also known as A.T. Kearney.
I've said it as Kearney my entire life. So you're correcting me now, Alan.
Tough. Yes, think spooky carnival clowns.
Yes. I'm sure that's how he introduced himself, right?
That's right, exactly. And the other thing to think about is, even though the firm was largely known as A.T. Kearney for most of its existence, they've recently rebranded and they dropped the A.T. They're now just Kearney. So that's a new development. So Kearney joined with McKinsey in 1929, also working out of Chicago, and then became managing partner of the firm that he and McKinsey were at in 1935. Then there was a third partner in the picture, Marvin Bower. Now, being an ex-McKinsey guy myself, I know that Marvin Bower is a bit of a legend in the McKinsey world. While James McKinsey has his name on the door, and James McKinsey is recognized as the founder, in many ways, Marvin Bower is the spiritual father of McKinsey, because he was a lawyer by training, and he brought a lot of the legal profession philosophy into the consulting world. And was really kind of instrumental in putting his stamp on McKinsey and making it the firm that many people think of it as today. But one of the interesting things that I found out as I was digging into this history is that McKinsey, name on the door, he was kind of a behind the scenes guy, and he died relatively early, so didn't have a lot of impact on the firms that McKinsey and Kearney both became. And interestingly, Marvin Bower, even though he's kind of this larger than life figure inside McKinsey today, he himself was kind of a junior deputy up until the late 1930s. So he was a behind the scenes guy. And some of the people who were the biggest founders behind both firms were names that most people don't know today. But Kearney eventually went on to become managing director of the firm that was McKinsey, and then eventually that firm split for a bunch of reasons. Kearney wanted to stay in Chicago, and the firm that McKinsey was really growing up in and around New York City, and so the split happened. Kearney started his own firm that was initially known as McKinsey, A.T. Kearney and Company. And he ran that out of Chicago starting around like 1939, so like 10 years after, in the next decade after the founding of the firm. And that remained branded as McKinsey and Kearney together until the 1940s, like around 1947, when Kearney officially broke off and started his own firm called A.T. Kearney and Company. And it's interesting when, as I was trying to read between the lines of the difference between Kearney and McKinsey as firms, it seems that McKinsey, under the leadership of Marvin Bower, always wanted to be an international firm, and they just like ran after it. They grabbed the gold ring, and they grew. And that's kind of why I believe they're believed to be the preeminent consulting firm today. Whereas Kearney, based in Chicago, was a little bit more provincial, perhaps. And he said, there were a couple of quotes I read from him where he said, "Why do we need to open up any other office? We can service everybody from Chicago." And as I was kind of looking at the numbers of Kearney employees, it was pretty obvious that it was a small firm just about up into the point when Kearney passed away. He passed away in I think it was 1963, but he retired in 1961. And right around the time that he retired, they were about 70 total employees. Then the next person who took over from him, within about a decade, they were 1,000 employees. So, and the global expansion happened. So there was a real kind of push for growth after Kearney left. But it's interesting that.
And at this point, Alan, so McKinsey, when did he move to New York, and was he starting it up there? It was okay. Because I kind of in my mind, and this is probably most people just because the name's on the door kind of thing, you kind of consider him like the Sam Walton of his own company, right? Like he kind of saw it through. He was there. He had his suit and his tie on, walking around the office. Like that's kind of how I always envisioned McKinsey. Like that was the lore that I created in my own head.
Exactly. And I think you'll find this is true with a lot of companies. McKinsey was just the first one there, but the one who oftentimes grows the business isn't the same one who was the first one there. And that's truly the case with McKinsey. McKinsey even left his own firm 3 years after it started to become CEO and chairman of a retail store in Chicago. So he wasn't even there for much of it. Oftentimes it's these junior deputies who grow it up and then eventually rise to the leadership positions later on.
What's funny? Like, as I think through that, is kind of what they've instilled in a lot of companies too, because there are these like tech companies and they have these founders that, started off the ground, whatever, say, bring it to $100 million, $1 billion. And then it's like, but you're not the guy to run it. And it's kind of what they did within their own firm too. Whether that was chosen or he was pushed out, like that's essentially what happened. Brought in an operator that then grew it and took it to the next level.
And certainly true of consultancies, I think, because, you think about law firms, which are the close corollary. You'll oftentimes read the name of a law firm and you'll say, okay, but there's nobody there with that last name. How does that work exactly? And it's just because whomever the initial founders were, they oftentimes move on, maybe even up and out. And then, more powerful underlings eventually kind of really make the name for the firm and set the leadership direction for it. So very interestingly, that's the history of A.T. Kearney, and the reason why we're kind of digging into this is Kearney really is, I would say, they've made their mark in the procurement world as being not just procurement focused, but largely procurement focused. And in the world that you and I live in, Tom, they are all over the place. And as I was looking into the impact that they made, everybody may have heard of the famous Kraljic Matrix. I don't know if that's familiar to you, Tom, but in the 1980s, there was a partner at Kearney. Yeah, Kraljic. It's worth spelling for people his last name because it's kind of complicated. Kraljic.
Kraljic, right?
Krajlic.
Okay, is this that?
Yeah.
Are we thinking the same thing with those boxes? Like
yes, it's a 2x2 matrix.
The 2x2. The 2x2. Oh, geez, the 2x2.
Standard.
Oh no.
Which interestingly, Kraljic and Kearney are not famous for creating. I believe that that bragging right belongs to Boston Consulting Group, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're the ones who made the first 2x2s and made them famous. But Kraljic said, hey, I see something good and I'm going to take it. And he made a 2x2 for the world of procurement. And there's a fascinating seminal article that I read in the Harvard Business Review in 1983. I didn't read it in 83. I read it this morning. But in 1983, Kraljic, being one of the managing directors at Kearney, published this article called "Purchasing Must Become Supply Management." And the upshot of this article, where he introduces his Kraljic Matrix and puts, lays down a lot of what I would consider to be modern procurement best practices in this one single article. It's basically, if I had to summarize the article, I would say procurement, purchasing must become procurement, and it must move from tactical to strategic. And it's just a fantastic article. And I think it was the 80s that really saw this big push. And it was Kearney as a firm that was behind this big push to make the function of procurement so much more strategic. And so a lot of what we do today, Tom, I guess we owe to these early pioneers, largely from the firm Kearney. Some of the other interesting things, other than the Kraljic Matrix that Kearney is known for, and in addition to the 7-step strategic sourcing process, they have a very famous thing called the procurement chessboard. Don't know if you've ever interacted with that. Think of it like the Kraljic Matrix on steroids. It's an 8x8 matrix, so 64 boxes, and it really is like a toolkit. It's meant to be, hey, here are the different tools, the different levers you can use as you're trying to apply good procurement practices. 64 different tools in the toolkit.
I think I've seen a version of that. Yeah. But it was from a different consulting company. They probably just took that and then applied it, right? Not that wouldn't be the first time that happened.
Checkerboard. Yeah, okay, the checkerboard or something. They call it the chessboard. Kearney also has something they call the AEP, the Assessment of Excellence in Procurement, which is, think of that like a qualitative measure of how is your procurement organization doing, how mature is it. And then they have a thing called ROSMA. It's a little bit of an awkward name. ROSMA. It stands for Return on Supply Management Assets. And that's more of a quantitative way of looking at a procurement organization and saying, okay, how are you doing from a numbers-based perspective, a quantitative perspective? So I think the upshot here is thank you to Kearney for putting procurement on the map and really starting the journey of the procurement function from tactical to strategic. I feel like we're still early days. I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done, and we got some laborers in the field, some hands at the plow, yours and mine, and a whole bunch of other colleagues who are doing this, and looking forward to seeing where our function goes.
Yeah, we should go into, because I know you have some strong opinions, thoughts in that area of like the next steps. Call it next gen sourcing, next gen procurement. We should dive a little deeper into that. Get your Kearney hat on. I guess that's a no pun intended. But
Kearney mask.
Yeah, but just looking, and I think I know where this. I went to ChatGPT, my buddy, because I always test it out, just to see like the size of consulting companies. I think I also clicked on the website that it was probably pulling this from. So McKinsey, they're about a tenth of the size now. Kearney versus McKinsey. I don't think a lot of these numbers are public, so they're very estimated. It's kind of probably like the net worth calculators as you go online, like what's whatever Leonardo DiCaprio, what's he worth, and just totally makes it up. But McKinsey's estimated at 15 billion and Kearney's 1.5 billion. Not that those are any numbers to sneeze at, right? But nevertheless,
no. Yeah, the numbers I saw that I thought were interesting. Yeah, so a tenth the size.
Mm-hmm.
So Kearney never really grew into the powerhouse that McKinsey is.
Mm-hmm.
Although 6,000 employees, 5,000 employees, not small. But it's the revenue per employee that I found interesting because that puts it all in perspective. McKinsey is at about $350,000 per employee, and Kearney is at about $275,000 per employee. And those are interesting numbers. There's the big Kearney doesn't even rank in the big three consulting firms.
It
in
feels so
terms of
low,
size and
though,
revenue.
for them. Knowing their billable rates.
Yeah. Then you think about all the support staff. I mean, there's a lot of overhead.
That's
in these
true. They are
businesses.
heavy overhead, hence the
And
rates
don't
too.
forget-
That's a good point.
Don't forget the snack closet. They have a well-stocked snack closet.
Yeah, well, there's 40% of that overhead.
Yes. But what was interesting to me is so Kearney isn't in the big three. The big three are lovingly referred to as MBB.
Yep.
Mike Bravo, and that's McKinsey, BCG, Bain.
Mm-hmm.
And while McKinsey is the largest, very interestingly, BCG, Boston Consulting Group, which was founded, much later. It was 1963. I believe it was by an ex McKinsey guy. They have fewer employees, 30,000 employees, but their revenue per employee is more like $450,000. So
BCG's
$100,000 more per employee than BCG, more than McKinsey. It's
interesting.
Fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah. One thing that I would recommend everybody do that just management consulting companies are amazing at is learn how they present. That's one thing I got. Those are my biggest takeaways when I worked in finance. I worked for a guy that was an ex-BCG guy. And he was like, essentially, you can't, if I delete the whole slide, you should be able to tell what the slide's about based on the title. So like the storyline, you end up creating this like storyline, this through line for the whole presentation within finance is very important because you're essentially telling a story based on the numbers and you have to make it clear to folks. I would suggest like find a YouTube video, like how BCG, McKinsey, Bain, they all do this very similar thing. The stories are very important to those companies. So that's something that everyone can learn from management consulting companies. I think that they should learn.
I like that. I like that. And it's worth noting because I think everybody thinks, oh, that means my slides, my presentations need to have a lot of sex and sizzle and a lot of graphics. And no, that's not it at all. It does come down to what you just said. It's storyline, it's narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a famous thing that they beat into us as new associates at McKinsey. If you don't tell your audience what to think, they're going to think whatever the hell they want to think. So you got to tell them, here's what all of our analysis.
I got a secondary beating off that. I was secondhand smoke, but it was very well instilled in me on a monthly basis after every month end close.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. But it was, it was a huge takeaway for me. I hated it at first because it is a mental shift of going from like, I don't know, just say like, number of suppliers and revenue and spend, right? Like that's what it goes from. And then it turns into something more like the majority of spend is focused in areas 1, 2, 3, and leverage in ABC, something like that, right? Just like
That's right.
it has to have a thought to it. And then you can have the same darn graph they would have had anyway. But yeah, it does help. One thing, Alan, we're going a little lengthy here, but I am curious to see, just based upon like with the same idea of management consulting in mind, where they will go with all of this ChatGPT and Perplexity and all these things, and KPMG and all of the consulting companies in general that have high partner costs. Where, say for tax, right? You're doing international tax stuff. A lot of folks will get on the line, like a lot of your head of tax will get on the line with KPMG or maybe they're Accenture or whomever, EY. And they'll say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Like, and then, there's $8,000. Like, okay. A lot of that upfront, like I'm thinking about this, that all those partners were in the same position, if not lower than like your head of tax at some point. And then they learned along the way. The way that I view ChatGPT is kind of like the quick summarizer, and then you can go deeper in certain places when you realize like, okay, I think I need to, you can just ask questions. It's kind of like you create your own book along the way, and you can think through these things essentially out loud. And then you can get the fine-tuned piece from that KPMG partner, and then that $8,000 bill ends up being $2,000, or would it really end up being like $30,000 bill ends up being like $3 or $4 or $5.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say put an extra zero at the end.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's all the numbers have extra zeros when it comes to partners, which is fine because they offer the value. But if that upfront work through, I mean, you can cut out like 75% of what you're going to ask them and get really poignant and like considerate with the questions you're asking and the time you're using. I'm curious how they're going to mitigate all of that. And
can I tease
please.
up maybe a conversation for next week?
Sure.
I'll present the results of a paper using ChatGPT in Boston Consulting Group with 4,000 consultants. It was a paper that was published probably about a year ago, and I think it was
They wrote it. It
earned no. It was an academic institution that did the research, but BCG offered up 4,000 of their associates and said, we're going to make 3 groups. We're going to have one group that uses ChatGPT. We're going to have another group that doesn't use ChatGPT, and we're going to have a group in the middle that we're going to call the hypers. They use ChatGPT and they get training on how to be better at using ChatGPT. And this was like a year-long study, and they published the results, and it was my favorite paper of last year. So I will bring that and go over that next week.
All right. That'll be interesting because my mind's been going there. Because I feel like they're the management consulting companies too. They're the ones that need to think this through because they're going to be disrupted this go around.
Oh yeah.
So, all right, Alan, we're at the end of our general time here.
That's fun. I like that, and we'll cover off on this the results of use of AI in the consulting field. All for next week.
Sounds good. All right. Later.
Get home safe.
All right.
See ya.
Will do.
Bye.
All right. Bye. Thanks for joining us on the Rebuild Procurement podcast. Like and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your pods to stay up to date on the latest content.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
Rebuild.
Show me, and you won't hear the word.
Rebuild.